I thought I'd seen every twist that life could offer, until I found myself standing at the edge of a choice I never thought I'd make. This is my confession. My name is Teresa, and I'm 65 years old. If you had asked me a year ago whether I believed in second chances at passion, or in crossing lines I'd once considered unbreakable, I would have smiled politely and changed the topic. My friends used to call me the grounded one, the woman who had everything arranged: a respectful marriage of 40 years to Roger, a cozy retirement home near the lake, and a predictable routine of gardening, yoga classes, and grandchildren's birthday parties. By all accounts, I was content. Yet over the last few years, a sense of stagnation quietly grew between Roger and me. We no longer argued or even talked much. Our conversations were reduced to grocery lists, TV schedules, and doctor's appointments. When we first married, we'd sworn to travel the world, keep up with new hobbies, live with curiosity. But the decades had sifted those vows down to comfortable habits and polite cohabitation. I convinced myself that this was natural, that love eventually matured into stillness. But a whisper in my heart kept asking, is this truly all that remains? I hardly admitted that whisper to myself. The rhythms of daily life, tending my rose bushes at dawn, cooking dinner by late afternoon, watching evening news with Roger, lulled me into believing all was well enough. Then I met Ian, and the hush in my soul abruptly cracked open. He was 50, recently moved to our lakeside community. One morning I was watering my front lawn when he passed by, introduced himself as a new neighbor who loved the view of the lake. I made a casual comment about how the summers here could be breathtaking, and we ended up chatting longer than intended. There was an ease in his presence, a friendly curiosity that I found refreshing. At first, we only exchanged neighborly words.
He'd wave hello when he jogged past our house, or I'd ask about his progress refurbishing the old cottage he'd bought. Roger showed mild interest in hearing about the new person in town, but after a polite question or two, he'd return to the newspaper. Days slipped into weeks, and I noticed how I caught myself looking forward to glimpsing Ian's silhouette in the distance, strolling by or fixing something on his porch. It felt harmless, just a spark of interest in someone new. Soon, our small greetings turned into longer talks. If he saw me pruning my rose bushes, he'd pause to ask about my gardening tips. He mentioned that he'd lost his wife several years earlier and felt drawn to the quiet of our lakeside roads, hoping to rebuild a simpler life. I responded with empathy, though I rarely mentioned my own marriage's discontent. I was too used to presenting myself as happily settled. But every time we spoke, a gentle warmth bloomed in my chest. I told myself it was simply the joy of friendly company in a neighborhood mostly populated by couples busy in their own routines. Then came the day of the craft fair, held annually at the community center by the water. Roger and I usually attended together, but that morning he decided he'd rather stay home and watch a sports game. I went alone, weaving through booths selling homemade jams, knitted scarves, and local pottery. Ian appeared by my side, smiling and greeting, saying he was looking to buy a housewarming gift for his sister. We browsed together, laughing at tacky magnets and complimenting carved wooden figures. Before I realized it, the sun was setting and the fair began packing up. He offered to walk me home. During that short walk, I felt more genuine conversation in a half hour than I'd had with Roger in weeks. Somehow, I invited Ian in for tea, purely out of neighborly courtesy, I told myself. Roger was out with a friend, so the house was quiet. We sipped our tea in the sunroom, chatting about the fair. The hush that settled afterward wasn't awkward. It felt charged with something unspoken. When our eyes met, I saw a question there, one I knew was mirrored in my own face. Are we stepping onto dangerous ground? I set down my teacup, nerves fluttering. He thanked me for the tea, but neither of us moved to stand. My heart pounded, a mix of excitement and dread. Finally, I cleared my throat, stammering that I should be getting dinner started. He nodded, understanding, and left with a gentle smile. After he was gone, I realized my pulse was racing in a way I hadn't felt in years. Days later, when Roger was out playing golf, Ian called to ask if I had any tips for repotting the houseplants he'd purchased. That flimsy excuse led me to his place, an older cottage with half-unpacked boxes and paint samples scattered around. I insisted I was there only to give advice on soil mixtures and watering schedules. We ended up reorganizing his entire living room, chatting about everything from childhood memories to recipes we both wanted to try. There was an openness between us that felt shockingly intimate for two people who'd only known each other a short time. He noticed me rubbing my shoulder, sore from hauling heavy boxes, and offered to help massage out the knot. The first contact of his hand on my shoulder sent a jolt through me. I tried to mask it with a laugh, but inside I was trembling. Even that small gesture carried a wave of tenderness I hadn't experienced in so long. Eventually, we both recognized we were lingering too close, too long. We pulled back, apologizing, each breath tight. But the line was drawn then. Our connection was no mere neighborly friendship. I told myself to put a stop to it. I was a 65-year-old married woman, content with her life, but that contentment had eroded, replaced by a quiet ache to feel recognized, to be truly seen. Whenever I glanced at Roger, I wondered if he noticed my restlessness. He never asked deeper questions or displayed alarm, which somehow hurt me more. It confirmed how little attention he paid to my moods. Ian and I started texting under innocent pretenses, updates on how his painting project was going, how my garden fared. Those messages soon ventured beyond small talk, drifting into confessions about lonely evenings and memories we both missed. He'd mention missing the spark of real companionship. I'd reply with guarded admissions about how routine had dulled my marriage. In those digital exchanges, we found an intense closeness that overshadowed caution. One hazy afternoon, I invited him to see my prized rose garden in the back. Roger was out, running errands. We walked among the blooms, discussing each variety, half pretending we were only there for a horticultural chat. But when we reached the far corner of the yard, hidden behind tall hedges, the unspoken tension erupted. A breeze rustled the branches, and we turned to each other, hearts pounding. He touched my cheek softly, eyes full of concern and longing. My breath caught. I whispered something incoherent, and he leaned in. The kiss we shared was tentative, charged with equal parts desire and guilt. In that stolen moment, the world slipped away. 65 or not, married or not, I felt more alive than I had in decades. Then reality crashed in. I stumbled back, tears pricking my eyes, murmuring, I was sorry, I couldn't do this. He stepped away, pained understanding on his face. We parted in a swirl of confusion, both shaken by how naturally it happened, how unstoppable it felt. The next few days, I avoided him and lied to Roger about my red-rimmed eyes, blaming allergies. I wanted to pretend the kiss never happened, but my heart clung to that flicker of heat. Late one night, I found myself in the living room, staring at wedding photos from decades ago. Roger's once inquisitive eyes sparkled in those pictures. Now we barely spoke. I felt a wave of grief for the marriage I used to have, and a surge of longing for the closeness I'd discovered in Ian. Eventually, we found ourselves together again. Maybe it was inevitable. Roger had gone on an overnight fishing trip, leaving me alone. Ian texted to ask if my shoulder was still bothering me. I said I was fine, but lonely. He arrived at my door with a bottle of wine, half apologizing for the intrusion, half hoping I'd invite him in. Of course I did. We ended up on my sofa, the tension between us thick. I tried to speak logically about how I was married, how I was older than he was, how this was all so wrong. But logic dissolved in the face of a longing that roared to life. We kissed again, deeper this time, acknowledging that we were stepping across every moral line we once respected. I led him to a quiet part of the house, my pulse thudding with a mixture of shame and rapture. The night became a blur of whispered confessions and gentle caresses, each second fraught with the knowledge that we might regret it tomorrow. Yet in that moment, I clung to the closeness as if it were oxygen, the embodiment of everything I'd been missing. The morning after, I woke up awash in guilt, yet with an odd sense of peace. Ian slipped out before Roger returned. I spent hours in the backyard, tears streaking my cheeks, trying to sort through the swirl of emotions. When Roger got home, I greeted him as usual, but my mind buzzed with the secret I carried. The next weeks blurred in a mess of half-truths. Ian and I continued seeing each other, sometimes in his cottage, sometimes walking by the lake at dusk. We told ourselves we'd keep it discreet, that no one needed to know. Deep down, we both sensed how fragile our bubble was. Inevitably, cracks appeared. Roger noticed how often I was gone, how I sometimes forgot tasks or spaced out during dinner. One night, while rummaging in a drawer, he found a receipt for the fancy wine Ian had brought. I tucked it away absent-mindedly. Confronting me, he demanded to know whose name was on the signature line for the credit card. I was cornered, stammering excuses about a neighbor's purchase. He didn't buy it. The next morning, he followed me as I drove out, watched me park near Ian's cottage. I had no idea he was there until I left 2 hours later and found him waiting by my car, face pale with fury and betrayal. I tried to explain, voice trembling, tears streaming. He said he'd suspected something, but never imagined it could be so real. Why? He kept asking, voice cracking. Why would you do this after all these years? I had no clear answer. I loved him for the decades we'd shared, but I felt hollow in our life, starved for connection. He stormed off, telling me not to come home until I figured out what I truly wanted. I ended up at Ian's cottage, shaking, sobbing, explaining what happened. He cradled my hands, guilt etched on his features, saying he was willing to step aside if I needed to salvage my marriage. I felt torn to the core. Could I walk away from a man who made me feel alive? Or could I stay with Roger and bury this painful episode, hoping we could mend? None of it seemed simple. In the aftermath, Roger left to stay with his brother for a time, leaving me alone in the house we once cherished. Ian urged me to be honest with myself. Did I want to fight for my marriage or risk building a life with him? Or did I need space to rediscover who I was without any man overshadowing me? My heart remained a battlefield of shame, longing, and sorrow. Over coffee in the morning, I'd stare at the lake, remembering how small decisions can snowball into life-altering consequences. I can't promise a tidy conclusion. I wish I had one. All I know is that for a woman of 65 who believed all her big choices were behind her, I found I could still surprise myself, for better or worse. My name is Teresa, and this is the story of how I risked my marriage with Roger to chase a spark with Ian, a man 15 years my junior, awakening desires I'd let lie dormant. Whether it was worth it or not, the remains of my life now hang in the balance. Perhaps I'll learn that some secrets shouldn't be kept, or that longing doesn't vanish with age. Maybe Roger and I can rebuild what once shone so brightly. Maybe Ian and I can forge something new. For now, I sit with the reality that longing, once stirred, can topple a life built over decades.